One of the least known skills in the culinary world these days seems to be the ability to debone an entire chicken. I actually have a couple of recipes in my cookbook that are going to use a fully deboned chicken. I'm going to put the link to order that cookbook in the description box for you. I do have the instructions in the cookbook, but you may have found your way to this video because you might be reading my cookbook and wanted a little bit more information. So I'm going to show you guys how we debone an entire chicken while keeping it in one piece, totally intact, because you can do some really amazing things with it. This is not nearly as hard as it sounds if you know the right steps in the right order. So let's debone an entire chicken on Chris Cookin' Nashville. All right, here's how we do this step by step. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna dry our chicken really well with paper towels to make it easy to handle. Next, we're gonna turn the chicken breast side down on our cutting board. I think a paring knife is the easiest knife to do most of these steps with. You will need also a meat cleaver or a heavy chef's knife later, but we're gonna start with a paring knife. Make sure it's nice and sharp. We're gonna remove the first section of the wing. So that's the wing tip as well as this flat section right here. All we need to do is find the joint where the wing bends right there. You can use your thumb and your finger and feel as it flexes back and forth where that actual joint is, and you can cut right through the joint just like that. And these wings can be cooked in some other way, or you can try to pull the meat off, but honestly, it's not that much. So if you want, you can also just throw it into your bone broth and just pull off the little bits of meat then. Now we're gonna stand the chicken up so we can come in the top of the chicken. We're gonna go down through the open part of the skin, and you're gonna find where the drumette of the wing meets with the main carcass. You move that back and forth and you can feel that joint right there where it connects. This is the shoulder joint of the wing. We're gonna take our paring knife, come in from the top inside the skin. Don't cut through the skin. We're gonna come in, find that joint, and we're going to cut right down into that wing joint just to separate this drum bone. Once that is loose, you can see that joint is now completely cut free from the shoulder. We're gonna do that on both sides. So now we're gonna stand the chicken up on its legs, and the breast is facing away from me, the backbone is towards me. And if you feel on top of the breast meat here inside the skin, you'll feel there's a little V-shaped bone that runs this way right there through the breast meat. That is the wishbone, and you need to remove that because that connects the meat to the carcass. So we're gonna take our paring knife, come in from the top, and we're gonna cut along the sides just of that little V-shaped bone. And I'm gonna cut on both sides of each of the bones. So the right and left on the right breast meat, and the right and left of the bone on the left breast meat. Now what that's gonna do is leave a little V-shaped pocket, and you can take your finger and reach in on both sides. You can grab that wishbone and you can pull straight up to remove the wishbone. And it may come out in a couple of pieces because it does break fairly easily. That's fine, just make sure you get it off of both sides and pull it out. Once the wishbone is removed, we're gonna turn this back onto its breast. We're gonna take our paring knife and we're gonna slice from the neck all the way down to the tail across the backbone. This is gonna expose the backbone so we can begin to peel the chicken away from the carcass. So we start right here on the spine, and we're just gonna cut against that backbone all the way down to the bottom of the chicken. So now we're gonna stand the chicken back up on its legs, and you're gonna take 2 fingers here, and we're going to go in between the carcass and the breast meat and the tenderloin. So there's a natural separation between the big piece of breast meat and the tenderloin that sits right against the carcass. And you can find the little gap right there, and your fingers will actually fit down inside of that gap behind the breast meat. So you're gonna stick your fingers down in there to cause that separation, and then with your free hand, grab the wing joint that we have left here. Grab that bone, get it with your thumb and your fingers, and we're going to rotate our wrist and we're gonna peel that away as we use our fingers here to help separate the breast meat. So we're gonna peel this down, and then we're gonna pull it away from the side of the spine here to begin to peel that down. And we're only going to peel far enough until we reveal the oyster. Now the oyster is this little piece of meat that sits on the thigh right next to the spine, and you can feel it because when you run down the spine you'll find a little spot. It starts to get a little puffy right there. That is where the oyster sits. So we're going to peel the skin on one side just until we start to expose that oyster, and then switch hands and do the same thing with the wing on the other side. And it's kind of a little nugget, a little pocket. It's shaped like an oyster. And we're just gonna cut to free that dark meat of the oyster right there from the backbone on both sides. Once we have freed the oysters, you'll be able to see the hip joints on either side. So we're gonna come down to the hip joint here, grab the leg, and we're gonna push up towards the top of the neck, and then you grab the leg and fold it out backwards, and that will pop the hip joint out of its socket. And then you can take the paring knife and cut through any of the leftover tendons. We're gonna do the same thing on the other side. So we grab the leg, push it towards the neck, and then grab the thigh and leg together and fold it out backwards towards yourself and away from the spine. And that will pop that hip joint out right there. And then we can cut through the tendons to fully free that hip joint. Once the hip joints are free, we're gonna come back up here to the top. We're gonna go down in front of the tenderloins again, and we're gonna take our other free hand and go down between the breast meat and the tenderloin, and we're gonna pull the carcass away from the breast. So we're gonna take our two hands and separate the breast away from this carcass. And you'll end up with the carcass of the chicken, which still has the tenderloin meat attached to it. And you will have the main body of your chicken with the legs and those wings still attached, and of course the breast meat on the back of the skin. So once we have the chicken separated from the carcass, we can go ahead and debone the thigh and the drumstick. So you're gonna come here to the top joint of the thigh, and we're gonna start to cut the meat free from the top rounded knuckle of the thigh bone. We're gonna do what's called Frenching the bone. You're gonna hold the knife and you're gonna keep it 90 degrees to the bone, and you're gonna use a scraping motion to push the meat down all around the entire bone towards the next joint. So we're just gonna scrape, turn a little bit, scrape. Be careful you don't cut yourself here. This is kind of the only place where this technique can be a little squirrely if you try to go too fast. Just take your time. So we're gonna scrape that thigh meat all the way down off of that bone until we get to the next joint where it connects to the drumstick. Now, once we get here, we're gonna cut very carefully this meat that sits right against that joint. And we wanna try to remove as little of this meat as possible, but we need to cut sort of in a circular motion around that joint so that we keep the drum and the thigh bones attached to each other. And once you've worked your way all the way around the joint, you can then come in and grab the drumstick bone, and you can French the exact same way, scraping that meat down towards the tip of the leg where the foot would normally be. Once we get to the end of the drumstick where the foot would typically be, we're going to invert this back to its original shape, because now you need a meat cleaver or a heavy chef's knife. So we're gonna use some kind of heavy metal knife. And right here where the knuckle end of the drumstick is, it thins out sort of the ankle or the little thin part of that leg bone. We're going to use the back side, the dull side of your cleaver or knife, and with one solid motion, you're gonna break through that bone. And the whole thigh and drumstick bone will come out. And this goes in our bone bowl. Now, the only bone left in the leg is that little knuckle piece, which we're gonna leave there so that when we cook this, it doesn't all shrink up. We'll cut that out right before we serve whatever recipe we use this for. Now we're just gonna repeat the exact same process on the other side with the other leg, the thigh and the drum, deboning it exactly the same way. All right, once we have the legs totally deboned, the only bone left in this main piece of the chicken is this little wing drumette that we have left. And we're gonna do the exact same thing as we just did with the legs, where we start around the top of the bone. just get this started so we can clean the wing bone. Once you've Frenched the bone far enough that you can get a good grip of the wing, you can just take your other hand here and you can pull and just remove the wing bone straight out and then reinvert that wing back to its original shape. Let's do that on the other side with the other wing as well. So there is our completely deboned main body of the chicken. The only other thing we need to worry about is getting the tenderloins off the carcass. Now, generally speaking, you can do this with your thumb by just running down between the tenderloin meat and the breastbone from the carcass. If you find that to be a little difficult, you can use your paring knife and you can slide right down along the side next to that carcass, right along the breastbone to the very tip. And once you cut those little connective tissues free, you should then be able to get your thumb and finger in there and peel that tenderloin away from the carcass. And now our carcass is just the leftover bones and maybe little bits of fat and meat that are still attached. That goes into our bone bowl to make bone broth. So there's our completely deboned chicken. This can be laid totally flat. You can season this however you want. You can cook this in a lot of ways. One of the ways is a chicken ballotine, where you actually stuff it and roll it, tie it together and cook it. This is all in my cookbook. I've also done some things on my channel here, and I'll show you guys more things in the future. That is a completely boneless chicken that you can now use for all kinds of amazing recipes. And these little tenderloins, by the way, you can pull the little tendon out of it if you want by gripping it with some paper towel and using a knife at a 90-degree angle and peel it out, but it's optional. You don't have to do that. These then fit perfectly in the gap right between the breast meat and the thigh, so that you have a perfectly flat, ready to cook chicken to do things like my Roadkill Chicken or a chicken ballotine or any of these other amazing recipes. I hope that's helpful. This is a very straightforward process. If you do it a handful of times, it gets very easy. You get to where you can do it really quickly. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. This is Chris Cookin' Nashville. You guys eat your meat, especially when it's a completely deboned chicken. Love your life. I'll see you in here for more recipes, and don't forget to get that cookbook if you haven't already. Link in the description.